My name is Terrence, and I am 58 years old. For the first time in 3 decades, I can breathe easy. I sold my trucking business, a modest but honest living that raised my daughter after her mother passed. My plan was simple: a comfortable retirement, maybe fix up the old house, and help my Eleanor start her own family. I believed family was everything. But a strange unease has been gnawing at me, a shadow from an afternoon visit months ago when my daughter brought me a stack of papers to sign. Before I tell you how that shadow swallowed all the light, I would love to know where you're listening from today. Drop your city in the comments below, and if you've ever placed your absolute trust in someone, hit that subscribe button. This is a journey to the heart of a betrayal I never saw coming. You know, they say you build a life brick by brick. My bricks were long hauls on interstate highways, the smell of diesel and coffee keeping me awake, and the constant humbling math of making ends meet. I did it all for her, my Eleanor. Her mother, Sarah, was the love of my life. Cancer took her with a cruel swiftness when Eleanor was just 10. One day, our house was full of laughter. The next, it was filled with a silence so heavy I could barely move through it. I promised myself, and I promised Sarah's memory, that our girl would never want for love. So I drove. I drove through birthdays I missed, through school plays I heard about over crackling phone lines, through Christmases, where the best I could do was a truck stop. Gift wrapped in brown paper. She never complained. She was this bright, serious-eyed child who understood too much too soon. She became my reason for every weary mile. When she got accepted to college for marketing, I felt a pride so fierce it hurt. I worked extra routes to pay for it. Seeing her graduate, her cap and gown, that smile, that was my life's greatest dividend. Then came David. He was slick, a real estate agent with a smile that seemed practiced. He talked about portfolios and equity and wore shoes that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. But Eleanor loved him. She looked at him with the same starry-eyed hope I remembered from her childhood. Who was I to dim that light? I gave them a generous sum for their wedding, wanting her day to be perfect. It was a beautiful ceremony. I danced with my daughter, her head on my shoulder, and I thought, this is it. We made it. The hard part was over. So when I finally sold the business last year, it felt like the last piece of a long puzzle clicking into place. The money wasn't a fortune, but it was security. I sat at my kitchen table, the one with the scratch from where Eleanor once did her science project, and I mapped it out. A chunk into a boring, safe retirement fund. Another chunk to replace this old roof and finally fix the leaking porch. And a separate, meaningful amount set aside in my mind for a down payment on a starter home for Eleanor and David. I told her about this plan over Sunday dinner. "Don't you worry about us, Dad," she said, squeezing my hand. "You've done enough." But I hadn't. Not in my heart. I wanted to give them a foundation, something solid to build on, just like I'd always tried to do. The first crack in that foundation appeared on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Eleanor showed up alone, which was unusual. David was usually attached to her side, a constant, energetic presence. She brought lemonade, my favorite, and we sat on the porch swing. The conversation was light, then it turned. She started talking about David's big break, a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity, a piece of commercial property that was about to skyrocket in value. The way she described it was all David's words: flipping, capital gains, leveraging. Then her voice softened. She reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were cold. "The thing is that," she said, her eyes glistening, "to move this fast, you need capital up front. David's credit. It's new. The banks are being so difficult." A knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't the plan. We were talking about a little house with a yard, not commercial flips. "What are you saying, sweetheart?" I asked. She took a deep breath. Would you just co-sign a loan for us? It's a tiny one, just a formality, really. Just to show the bank we have backing. David will pay it all off from the profits in 6 months tops. It's a guaranteed thing. She produced a folder from her bag. It was thick. I have all the papers right here. I felt a coldness seep into my bones. My mind flashed to David's expensive watch, his constant upgrading of cars. This felt wrong. This felt like his world, not ours. Eleanor, I don't know, I started. Her face crumpled. Not into anger, but into a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. I knew it, she whispered, looking away. I told David you wouldn't believe in us, that you'd think we were just kids playing games. That sentence was a masterstroke. It wasn't about the money. It was about my faith in her. It weaponized my entire life's purpose, being the father who believed. I looked at the papers. The print was small, dense with legalese. Can I take a night to look these over? I asked, my voice weak. The offer expires tomorrow at noon, she said, a single tear tracing her cheek. It has to be now. The pressure was a physical weight. My distrust of David warred with the fear of seeing that wounded look on my daughter's face forever. The memory of her as a little girl, trusting me to fix everything, overwhelmed me. With a sigh that came from the depths of my soul, I picked up the pen. I didn't read it. I just signed where her perfectly manicured finger pointed. "Thank you, Daddy," she breathed, kissing my cheek. The scent of her perfume, something expensive and unfamiliar, filled the air. "You won't regret this." As she walked back to her car, the folder clutched to her chest. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I had just jumped off a cliff because she asked me to, and I was only now wondering how far the ground was below. Life didn't change dramatically at first. That's how these things work, I've learned. The trap doesn't slam shut. It just quietly stops being a door. A few weeks later, an official-looking letter arrived from First Mercantile Bank. It was marked confidential and addressee only. My heart did a little stutter step. I called Eleanor. "Oh, that," she said, her voice breezy, a clatter of dishes in the background. "That's just the verification paperwork. They send those to the co-signer. You can just shred it." Something in her tone was off. It was too quick, too dismissive. "Shouldn't I open it?" I asked. A pause. "If you want, Dad, but it's just full of boring financial jargon. Really don't trouble yourself." So I didn't open it. I placed it on my desk, a little white rectangle of unease. That was mistake number 2. The visits changed. Eleanor and David were always swamped. When they did come over, the conversation was different. The humble starter home was never mentioned. Instead, David held court about his booming business, the luxury condos he was now selling, the network he was building. He talked about a property portfolio with a gleam in his eye. Eleanor sat beside him, nodding her smiles, looking more like accessories than expressions of joy. I felt like a spectator at a play about a life I didn't recognize. One Sunday they came for lunch. David was more animated than ever, talking about a game-changing deal that was about to close. His phone buzzed incessantly. Finally, he excused himself, stepping out onto the back porch for privacy. In his haste, his leather wallet slipped from his back pocket and fell onto the floor. I picked it up. As I went to place it on the table, a crisp, cream-colored business card slid out. It was for a woman named Anya Petrova, a luxury properties specialist at an agency called Echelon Estates. Curious, I flipped it over. On the back, in sleek blue ink, was handwritten, "For the Clearwater Ridge listing. Financing secured high-net-worth residential credit line. File processed. Congrats." A cold, understanding dread began to pool in my stomach. Clearwater Ridge. That was the new gated development on the west side, the one featured in the Sunday magazine for homes, starting at $2 million. High net worth residential credit line. The lemonade I'd been drinking turned to acid in my throat. I quietly placed the wallet back. My fingers trembling, I memorized the phone number on that card. When David came back in, full of apologies, I watched him. I really looked at him. I saw the calculation behind his smile, the ambition that had no ceiling. And I saw my daughter, my Eleanor, watching him like he hung the moon. For the first time, I felt a terrifying distance from her. She was no longer just my little girl in the passenger seat of my truck. She was an accomplice in a story I hadn't agreed to be in. The next morning, I acted. The passive worry was over. I was a trucker for 30 years. When you see a road hazard, you don't just close your eyes and hope. You navigate. First, I called the number on the card. I used my best retired businessman voice, the one I used to schmooze with dispatchers. "Hello, Anya Petrova, please. Terrence Blackwell calling. I'm inquiring about availability in Clearwater Ridge." The woman who answered was polished and enthusiastic. She spoke of curated living experiences, smart home integration, and breathtaking canyon views. I let her talk. Then casually I asked, "It sounds superb. What's the buyer profile like over there? I'd want to be among serious people." She laughed a tinkling laugh. "Oh, absolutely. We just closed on a stunning model for a lovely young power couple. He's in real estate. She's in marketing. Used a very streamlined financing process. They're the future of the neighborhood." My blood ran cold. I thanked her and hung up. The evidence was no longer a suspicion. It was a ringing in my ears. I went to my desk. My hands were steady now, fueled by a cold, focused anger. I opened the confidential letter from First Mercantile Bank. It wasn't a verification. It was a welcome letter for a new line of credit in my name, with a credit limit that made my vision blur. The listed collateral was my home address. My home. The one Sarah and I bought, where I raised Eleanor. I drove to the bank's main branch. I asked to speak to a manager about my account. The young teller was hesitant. I leaned in, my voice low and firm, the voice of a man who has hauled 40 tons through a blizzard. "Tell him Terrence Blackwell is here about a fraudulent $500,000 loan taken out in my name. He can talk to me now, or he can talk to the police detectives I call next." 5 minutes later, I was in a quiet, glass-walled office. The manager, a man named Robert with a tired face, listened. I showed him the letter. He typed on his computer, his expression growing graver by the second. He turned the monitor toward me. "Mr. Blackwell," he said softly, "this isn't just a line of credit. It's a mortgage. A home equity conversion mortgage, to be precise." On the screen was a document. The loan amount was a number so large it felt fictional. The purpose, purchase of primary residence. The property address, 127 Vista Crest Drive, Clearwater Ridge. The borrowers, Terrence Blackwell, co-signer, primary obligor. The buyers/owners on the attached purchase agreement, Eleanor Blackwell, Stewart, and David Stewart. They had used my name, my credit, my home as collateral to buy themselves a palace. They hadn't just asked for my help. They had stolen my financial soul and used it as a down payment on their dream life. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there, feeling the world. I knew the world of trust, of family, of a father's love, dissolve into pixels on a banker's screen. The betrayal was so complete, so surgical, it left me numb. They hadn't just crossed a line. They had erased it and built a mansion on the other side. I drove home on autopilot. The familiar streets looked alien. The house I pulled into, the house full of memories, was now just an asset on a ledger held hostage. I walked inside and closed the door. For a long time, I just stood in the middle of the living room in the silence. Then the dam broke. A sound tore out of me, a raw animal groan of pain. I slid down the wall onto the floor, my face in my hands, and I wept. I wept for Sarah, who wasn't here to help me navigate this. I wept for the little girl I carried on my shoulders, who was now a stranger, who saw me as a mark. I wept for my own stupidity. The grief was a tsunami. But as the hours bled into a day, the grief hardened into something else, a clear, diamond-hard rage. This was not going to be the end of my story. I would not spend my golden years bankrupt and heartbroken while they toasted their success with my money. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I got up. I made coffee. And I started to plan. I found a lawyer, a woman named Miriam Goldstein, who specialized in elder financial abuse. Her office was quiet, her demeanor calm but sharp as a tack. I laid out the entire story, showing her the bank documents, the business card, my notes. She listened without interruption. "This is egregious, Mr. Blackwell," she finally said. "But it's also a paper trail. They got greedy and sloppy. We have options." Our strategy was twofold: legal and personal. Miriam began the process of contesting the loan on grounds of fraud and lack of informed consent. She contacted the bank, putting a freeze on further draws from the credit line. But she also advised me on the personal side. "Confrontation now will just lead to lies and drama," she said. "You need the full picture, and you need to choose the time and place." I became a detective of my own life. I called Anya Petrova again, this time posing as a concerned uncle wanting to send a housewarming gift. I easily got the closing date and the scheduled move-in day. It was 3 weeks away. I learned the move-in process, the keys would be released to the buyers, and the moving company was scheduled for a morning delivery. A plan, cold and precise, formed in my mind. I would be there. Not to scream, not to beg. To present the facts. To take back control. Miriam helped me understand my precarious legal standing. Because I had signed, however, blindly, and because my house was collateral, I had a financial interest in the Clearwater Ridge property. It was a twisted knot, but it gave me a thread to pull. In those 3 weeks, I changed. The kindly, trusting father receded. In his place was a man who had been stripped bare and was now piece by piece rebuilding himself with steel and resolve. I was going to walk into their dream house and show them the nightmare they had created. Move-in day dawned clear and bright, a cruel parody of a perfect day. I dressed carefully in a simple button-down shirt and slacks. I looked like a man going to a business meeting, not the collapse of his family. Miriam had secured through a forceful legal request to the title company a one-time access code to the property citing a potential lien issue that needed immediate visual verification. It was a thin pretext, but it worked. The drive to Clearwater Ridge was like entering another country. The gates were ornate iron. The houses were not houses. They were monuments of glass and steel, set far apart on manicured cliffs. Number 1427 Vista Crest Drive was at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was breathtaking and sterile. I used the code on the sleek keypad. The lock clicked a soft, expensive sound. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The air smelled of new paint and money. The foyer was a vast emptiness of marble and echoing space. Sunlight poured through 2-story windows, illuminating a floating staircase. This was what my life's work, my home, my trust had been converted into. I stood in the center of the cavernous living room and waited. I didn't have to wait long. I heard the rumble of a large truck, the crunch of gravel, then car doors slamming. Bright, excited voices floated through the open front door. Laughter. Eleanor's laugh. It was a sound that used to be my favorite music. Now it felt like a shard of glass in my heart. They appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the brilliant light. Eleanor and David Arms linked their faces, turned to each other, radiant with triumph. They stepped across the threshold into their new life. And then they saw Mio. The smiles didn't just fade. They shattered. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. David's face went from tan to a sickly beige. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the moving truck's engine. I looked from my daughter's wide, terrified eyes to her husband's frozen shock. I took one step forward. My voice, when it came, was calm and steady, carrying in the empty space. "You didn't expect to see me here, did you?" David recovered first, a weak, blustering attempt. "Terrence, what a surprise." "We were going to tell you. Of course, we just wanted to get settled first." I cut him off. "Stop talking, David." I turned my gaze to Eleanor. "Eleanor, look at me." She was crying silently, tears streaking through her perfect makeup. "Daddy, please let me explain." "You have nothing to explain," I said, my voice still quiet. "I have all the explanations. I have the loan documents from First Mercantile, the $500,000 mortgage, the one that uses my house, the house your mother and I bought, as collateral. I have the purchase agreement for this place." I gestured around the cold, beautiful room. "I've spoken to Anya Petrova. I've spoken to the bank manager, Robert. I have a lawyer, Miriam Goldstein. She is currently filing a fraud complaint and an injunction." Each sentence was a hammer blow. Their facade crumbled. David's bluster evaporated into a desperate, wheedling tone. "It was just business, Terrence. A smart move. We were going to pay you back with interest. This is an investment for all of us." "You lied to me," I said, focusing on Eleanor. "You looked me in the eye, you used your mother's memory, and you lied. You turned me into a signature on a check you had no right to cash." Eleanor sobbed. "We needed it. David said it was the only way. You have all that money just sitting there." That sentence, the sheer entitlement, finalized everything. I laid out the choice just as Miriam and I had rehearsed. "You have two options. 1. You contact the title company today and voluntarily unwind this purchase. You work with the bank and my lawyer to assume this debt entirely in your own names, and you release my home as collateral. You do this cleanly, and I will not press criminal charges for identity fraud and forgery." David started to protest. I held up a hand. "Option 2. I walk out that door, call the police, and file a civil suit so large it will follow you into bankruptcy. You will lose this house, and you will likely face jail time. Choose." The movers were waiting outside, a tableau of normalcy against the surreal scene inside. The dream house had become a courtroom. Eleanor looked at David, a silent, frantic communication passing between them. The power balance had visibly shifted. The man with the plan had no plan for this. Finally, deflated David nodded, a sharp, bitter jerk of his head. We'll take option 1, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I looked at my daughter. "Eleanor." She just cried, hugging herself, and nodded. There were no loving words, no reconciliation. There was only the brutal arithmetic of consequences. I turned and walked out of their luxurious prison back into the sunlight. I didn't look back. The aftermath was a long, gray season of my life. The legal unraveling took months. Miriam was a pit bull. The sale of the Clearwater Ridge house happened at a loss. My credit was a wreck, scarred by the massive loan that had briefly existed. But my home was freed. The greatest loss wasn't financial. It was Eleanor. She chose, as people often do, in the harsh light of exposure, to blame the one who held the mirror. She called me once, her voice thick with a cold anger I'd never heard. "You ruined everything," she said. "You couldn't just be happy for us. You had to be small and vindictive. David was right about you." The line went dead. That was the last time we spoke. It was a pain deeper than any bankruptcy, a phantom limb that ached every single day. I sold the old house anyway. Too many ghosts. I moved into a small, tidy apartment in a quieter part of town. The first year was a blur of grief and quiet shock. But slowly, with the stubbornness that got me through all those long halls, I began to rebuild. I joined a group not for grief, but for something called financial exploitation recovery. I sat in a circle with other men and women, some older, some my age, all with eyes that held the same bewildered hurt. We shared stories of children of caretakers, of partners who saw our life savings as their lottery ticket. In their stories, I didn't feel so alone. I didn't feel so foolish. I started tinkering again. I fixed a neighbor's wobbly chair, then her antique clock. Word got around in the building. Now I have a little bench in a community workshop, and I restore old woodworking tools. There's a peace in taking something broken, something neglected, and giving it function and dignity again. I'm slowly learning to do that for myself. The lesson I learned wasn't about money. It was about love. I learned that love without boundaries is just an invitation to be consumed. That saying no to someone you love is sometimes the most profound form of yes to yourself, to your dignity, your safety, your right to a peaceful life. I learned to forgive myself for being a man who trusted his daughter too much. That trust was born of love, and I won't let their actions poison the beauty of what that love once was. But I will never forget. Forgetting would be a betrayal of the man I had to become to survive. I live simply now. My wealth is in the quiet mornings, the smell of sawdust, the genuine smile from a neighbor whose toaster I fixed. I sometimes wonder if Eleanor is happy, if the glittering life with David was worth the price of her father. I hope for her sake that she finds her way back to herself, Owen, from the shadow of that mansion. My story ends here, not with a bang, but with a careful, hard-won peace. The road ahead is simpler, narrower, and it is wholly my own. And for the first time in a long time, that is enough. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the sting of trust broken by someone close, I'd be grateful if you shared your own thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in my shoes? Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us all feel less alone. If you found value in this journey, please give this video a like. It lets me know these difficult stories are worth telling. And if you want to join me for more conversations about life hard lessons and rebuilding, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. However you're navigating your own journey, I wish you peace, clear boundaries, and the quiet strength to protect your own peace.